so many filmmakers are able to make films out of the dreams they had the night before.
Yeah.
They're literally like, I had a dream and now I'm going to spend some time trying to figure out how to tell that story. I do really believe in this interrogating of the self as often as possible, because I think if we can have a sense of what our questions are, those questions can drive us towards story.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Pep Talk. I'm your host, Kobe. It's great to be back with you. Joined today by a special guest, Daniel Voll, who has been here visiting Pepperdine. He's reported from war zones, tracked down war criminals, executive produced a hit Netflix series, and is currently filming a 9/11 documentary at Guantanamo. And today he sat down with us at Pepperdine, right before this actually, speaking to Professor Lacey Dent's students. He's also the author of a new book, On the Run with Mad Bombers, Outlaws, Lovers, and Movie Stars. Daniel, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Great to be here, Kobe.
So I want to talk some about storytelling today. You're a storyteller. I want to be able to pick your brain a little bit on that as someone who has some of those same tendencies myself. But I want to hear first a bit about your story. How did you first come to think, oh, maybe I'm a storyteller, maybe I want to be a writer, maybe I want to be a documentary filmmaker? Was it something you knew about from early on? Was it something that you kind of came to as time went on? Walk us through your own story there.
Well, I think that storytelling is, one of the essential components of being a human being. It's like we seem to need it just after nourishment, and we've always sat around fires and told each other tales, and I think it just begins in curiosity. How does our world look? How can I join the world? Who am I here? What's happening that interests me in the world? And I think from very early on, I was interested in conflict. I always cared about political leadership. I was interested in political movements, and very soon after having left college, I went to South Africa and began my journalistic career there, writing for Vanity Fair, and then would go back 10 years later to watch Mandela's election and to cover that for Esquire. And so the magazine world was a kind of first home for me, but I was a guy writing short stories and plays and poems since I was, a kid. And I think all of us who are trying to figure out kind of narrative and put the pieces of the world together, you're following your curiosities, and you're following your obsessions. And I just found that the storytelling that mattered to me both was following groups in conflict, but also I got really interested in my personal imagination, and I began doing a lot of documentary interviews. I grew up in a Rust Belt town in the Midwest that when I went off to college at Duke, we had a 25% unemployment rate. I came back to that community as a playwright, having written the first play. As a playwright in residence at the local theater, and I used that time to just do a lot of oral histories and to really listen to my community, and from those early oral histories, I began shaping stories, and it served me in good stead in that I'm just excited about knowing how somebody else navigates what it means to be human and this life. And so one of the stories in the book, On the Run with Mad Bombers, Outlaw, Lovers, and Movie Stars, is me following a 10-year-old kid here in LA on an incredible assignment from Esquire, young Jelani Stewart, who was born in South Central as the riots were occurring in the 90s. And I found Jelani when he was 10 years old and got to spend what ended up being 6 months with him. And Jelani taught me an enormous amount about watching the world from the eyes of somebody else. And into that story came not just an intimate story, but an epic story. And I got to, I got the privilege of being able to follow him to school, home, hang with him, meet his mother, find his mother's boyfriends, discover what his conflicts were, and what his passions were, and what his joy was. And then my job as a storyteller was to try to take that voice and put it into a long piece of narrative. In this case, was 10,000 words. And I think that's the model. What I've always tried to do is just find the individual in the middle of of a combat zone. And listen, I think families are combat zones. You know, I think life's a combat zone. So it doesn't have to be a war. We're all every day trying to, you know, we're engaged in something that if you have a camera or if you have a tape recorder or if you are taking notes, you hear the perfect line of dialogue. You hear the thing that just takes you a little deeper into somebody else's storytelling.
And so talk to me a little bit. You know, sometimes you're just sent on assignment. Sometimes you're following your own curiosity. You found yourself in a lot of, I think, strange, interesting situations, right? I mean, as the title of the book implies. When you're going into strange situations, you're dealing with, you know, terrorists. You're dealing with cults. You're dealing with people on the run. Talk to me about how you gain trust, and are you trying to maintain a sort of neutrality? Is there something else that's the goal there? When you're going into a situation that's intimidating to a lot of people, but you want to actually be able to tell a story in a way that's honest, how do you approach it?
It's the first and most important piece of this world is that you are seeking to gain entry into a subculture.
Yeah.
And as you gain entry in that subculture, it's interesting. I did a film, a doc for HBO, based on an article that's in this book, in which I found an 18-year-old kid who wanted to kill abortion providers, and he was being trained in something called the Army of God, and a couple abortion providers had been killed, and others had been seriously maimed, as had some nurses, and I was just very interested in, like, how you enter into armed violence and what that process is like. And I initially did the story and found this 18-year-old, and then it came time to, and that's one thing, because you're talking to them like we are right now, and you're taking notes, and maybe there's a tape recorder running, but there's not a sense yet that this is going to get your subject in trouble.
Yeah.
This is going to reveal things to your subject.
Yeah.
But most of the subjects I've approached have a deeply felt passionate interest in something. And so they don't mind telling you what they believe and why they believe these things. When we went then to film it for HBO, I realized that the way that I could enter into the world of this particular organization was with the promise that there wouldn't be a narrative voice. There wouldn't be a voiceover that's coming.
Yeah.
And that instead, we would use black cards only to kind of indicate turns of things to kind of set us. But it would be them. We would listen to their voices.
Just from the horse's mouth.
Yeah. And I think what they realized at the end of it all was that even if you leave somebody in that kind of unmediated environment, there's still a massive editorial process that you're going to go through. And so part of what doesn't get talked about a lot is that you get the interview, and then you have to select what are the things that you're going to lay out in your story and what things you're going to tell.
Yeah.
And I used to, as a journalist, especially when I was in the story that you mentioned, I was in Bosnia really hunting Radovan Karadzic, who was part of, you know, a mass murdering operation that had killed, you know, 13,000, 20,000 Muslims in extermination of ethnic cleansing, and who felt like he was right.
Yeah.
And so as I got closer and closer to him, I had to be with his henchmen and those who were around him. And I always wore, on most of my stories, I wore an old holster that belonged to my grandfather. And in that holster, I would keep my tape recorder. I just didn't want any confusion that I'm the law, which is to say that that you're on the record and I'm listening to you, but it doesn't mean that I'm here in affirmation of you.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that I'm here. Maybe sometimes I'll debate with you, but what I really want to understand is what's driving you toward the goals that you have.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stories in here were me approaching a time in American history, which was the 90s and early 2000s, where we began to see the fracturing of America, the overreach and sometimes inside the government, the beginning of of a divided America. You could see it happening. And I think there was a certain desire on my part to have a Geiger counter out and just try to get a reading on what was happening in America.
Yeah, what's actually going on beneath the surface, under the hood. It's really good. And I would wonder too, as if we have young storytellers out here who are students at Pepperdine, students elsewhere, and they're thinking through, okay, what kind of stories do I want to tell, both from an angle of maybe what kind of a medium. How did you know? Hey, at first for me, it's long form journalism, and then maybe it's filmmaking. Both what kind of stories in that sense, and also, okay, what kind of stories are actually making me curious? Is it just, man, follow the curiosity and go where it leads? How do you think you develop in that process?
I think that from somebody who's worked as a playwright, as a screenwriter, as a journalist, and spent a lot of time in the last years in the documentary world, a lot of it's following that curiosity and also training your mind to look for story.
Yeah.
And to say, oh, that's a story and I want to follow it, or here's an access point in. Because you're going to have to pitch that story to an editor.
Yeah.
You have to pitch that story to your own unconscious,
Yeah.
and that's the difference between the line of the journalist and the documentary filmmaker and the scripted writer and the playwright, who is essentially trying to understand what my own unconscious wants to say.
Yeah.
And how, so many filmmakers are able to make films out of the dreams they had the night before.
Yeah.
They're literally like, I had a dream and now I'm going to spend some time trying to figure out how to tell that story.
Yeah.
And sometimes that story could end up in a micro budget horror film, or it could end up being an Academy Award winning film that was generated by our own unconscious. So I love that the unconscious wants to wants to entertain. It wants to be understood. It wants us to translate for it.
Yeah.
And it seems to be a storytelling engine. So as much as my work is about crossing boundaries as a journalist, my work in fiction writing and my work that I'm doing now is deeply personal, with me trying to understand the story of my own family.
Yeah.
And I think that for a lot of students, even right now, I just think it's never too early to start interviewing one's parents. It's never too early to start the journaling of your own dreams and your unconscious, because it can be what leads you to story.
Yeah, really interesting. There's that we're a few of us are reading Eliot right now, and there's this line that always comes to me where he says, "The end of all our exploring is to arrive where we begun and know the place for the first time." Right, and I think for so many of us, as we're trying to tell stories, that's what we're doing. Right, we're getting out there in the world, and by doing that, we're actually getting at something within. Do you have advice on how to do that practically? Right, is it just when you go, oh, this is a story, whether it's out in the world, or this is a story in my mind if I'm a script writer that's somewhere deep down? Is it just you know it when you see it?
I'm fascinated by how much we all just take notes.
Yeah.
We're just constantly taking notes. Every writer I know is taking notes all the time.
Yeah.
And then you're consolidating those notes and trying to see which of those notes kind of keeps compelling you, because the discipline it's going to take go from story to craft.
Yeah.
That to me is that craft is by doing it over and over again, by continuing to look at it, by the willingness to have a first draft and to set it aside, willingness to have it be challenged. I think it's writing is a very lonely world of and one of the things that's incredible as you build out into these other worlds, television, film, is that you have a community. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things I loved about the theater also. You have a workshop of your work. You have a sense of seeing it and being able to keep exploring it, because I think the work is constantly trying to teach us something about ourselves also. But I think that I do really believe in this interrogating of the self as often as possible, because I think if we can have a sense of what our questions are, those questions can drive us toward story. And in the book, many of the pieces were assigned by magazines, but many of them I brought to the magazines.
Okay. Yeah.
And I would, and the short stories I've written, you bring to yourself. The plays are generated from some, but also the more you read of plays, the more you watch plays, the more you learn how to write a play. The more you watch theater, the more it can, and even if that goal is to be the set designer or painting it. There's a desire to be in an artistic community sometimes, and I think that collaboration is really underrated and enormously necessary as you go forward. But I think what underscores all this to me right now is, as you live in a time of AI in its ascendance, there seems to be a desire for the human voice as much as ever. And I think this is a thing for students to hold on to, and for all of us, is that how to be human in a time of technology is why there are going to be some of the greatest explorations of the human condition are going to probably come just from a face talking to you through the internet, telling you of its pain and of her sorrows or her dreams. And there's going to be an appetite and a yearning to connect to human story as AI takes over storytelling. And I think that's going to be coming in platforms that are yet to be created. I think storytellers are going to have to create these platforms. I do think that we saw it in theater, that you can build a theater in a town, you can put the theater in your garage, and you can create that online platform that can be the future home to documentary, that can be the future home to very private, idiosyncratic storytelling. And there's an audience, and that audience may be a niche audience, but it's always been a niche audience.
Well, and I think that's what's really interesting now with algorithms and whatnot is there's never been a better environment to connect your kinds of stories with the exact kinds of people who want to engage with those kinds of stories. And obviously there's a lot of uncertainty and whatnot that comes with this, right? I think both on the video storytelling front and when we think about long form journalism, is that dying or is it resurging with things like Substack? It sounds to me like your opinion is, hey, there are things coming that we don't even know what they look like yet. We've just got to be prepared.
Substack reminds me of CD-ROM. It's like we thought it was going to be this thing, like CD-ROMs were going to take over. And it was just an evolutionary step toward something else. I think that the direct contact with your audience is going to be, and the building of that audience is going to be part of what's going to be incumbent upon the storyteller or the producer who can create that. A lot of students I know have gone to work for podcasts right now in which they're digging deep into subjects that matter to them. And that heartens me a great deal.
You were saying how in some ways it's a return to oral history. And I mean, we've got little bite snippet podcasts like the one we're on now. But you've got people listening to 4-hour podcasts where they're getting deep dives on things, but in this very human way where it's just kind of two people having a cup of coffee together.
Well, that's what it might have replaced in a lot of ways, Kobe, is that exact. It is like meeting at the local pub and arguing about politics or sports or darts. And having highly charismatic people tell those stories. I'm interested in the introvert on podcasts. I'm interested in the introvert stories. I'm interested in the part of all of us that's shy and vulnerable in these ways, and I think and who's scared. I think that I think it's the beginning of a lot of storytelling is what do I fear? Like I've had a fear for years of drones, and my fear of drones is just that they're going to become ubiquitous, and we're engaged in a war right now in which drones are going to be the dominant factor in it. Within America, it's like, so when you start thinking about that, and all of a sudden the murmuration of swallows coming across the field in Iowa is all of a sudden the murmuration of drones. You say, okay, what's that going to look like, and how are we going to negotiate that, and how are we going to navigate that, and then you think as a storyteller, how's that going to impact on future stories about, what's gang warfare going to look like? What's the next, our president is carrying a drone, our president's security is carrying, instruments to shoot drones down. So all these things which were once the purview of science fiction, and it also gives me incredible hope in terms of storytelling because it's not as if it wasn't all predicted. It's not as if all this stuff wasn't already in the imagination. Some of the greatest storytellers ever were
Yeah.
here, and that, which is to say that exploring of the future is something that our brain must really want to do and our unconscious wants to do. We just have watched, Artemis go around the moon and back. And it's like, oh, they were 243,000 miles away.
Yeah.
100,000 miles away. It's like, oh, that's a story that we used to tell ourselves. It's come true. So once the stories come true, then the next stories are going to have to appear. Maybe they will all go back to Noah's Ark. Maybe they all go back to, the basics. I mean, I still would like to go back and interview Adam and Eve. I'd like to film the apple. You'd like to see the first
Well,
bite.
yeah, that'd be the most interesting doc of all time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that biblical stories, I'm interested in those in the Old and New Testament as filmic possibilities.
Yeah.
They're incredible.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason they just stick in our brains, right? There's something deep that they're resonating with. I want to go back to something you mentioned a moment ago, this idea of community. There's this quote I've thought of a lot recently where Kurt Vonnegut was giving a commencement address, and he sort of asked this rhetorical question. It's just kind of been ringing through my head a lot. He says, what should young people be doing with their lives these days? And he kind of like chuckles to himself, and he's like, oh, well, many things, obviously. But the most daring is to create stable communities where the terrible disease of loneliness can be cured.
Wow.
And everyone just, right, the air just kind of goes out of the room. Yeah. And I was really moved by something you said in the classroom earlier where you were talking about creativity as this space of community, right? And I think there's a tension at work there because as you alluded to, right, there can kind of be this like lonely artist in the ivory tower thing that goes on and that does have to go on at times. And yet I think for those of us who have created in community, I think there is like a special, there's a bond that can form there that's like nothing else. So how do you manage that tension as a creative? And if Vonnegut's right that this is what we should be trying to do with our lives, how can the creative life be a part of that?
How can you do it and also not become captive to the coercive control of others?
Yeah, exactly. Don't get into a cult.
That's where the kind of the cult work of the last years has been fascinating. I mean, my wife Cecilia Peck is a documentary filmmaker who's been following cults closely in the last years, and I've been executive producing her projects and kind of standing shoulder to shoulder with her team as we've been exploring these questions because I think that they take us right to this new kind of our new social media world, which is into AI, which is the extent to which community will be formed based on and around that which comes off of an artificial process, which is going to be the internet.
Yeah.
And I think it's got real implications in the faith community.
Yeah.
I think it's got real implications in pulling people out of theaters and out of orchestras and out of live things to have this new space that they're in, which is online. But I think the online spaces are going to become much more fluid, and I think that they're going to become. They're not going to be restricted to a box, that's for sure, in terms of future communications. I mean, I look forward to Einstein teaching me physics, for example. And so when it comes to kind of community, it's how to build it. Utopia at its foundation is doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like in its Greek, self. It's like a word about that essentially is not possible to achieve.
Yeah.
And so how do we as human beings create community? Theater is an incredible space if your director is somebody who's collaborative, if your fellow actors are themselves conducive to the process. And one of the things that we're talking about to directors today in the class is the importance of directors taking acting classes. So that because what do actors do but learn how to work in community and as scene partners.
Yeah.
And I think that television was essentially set up as a one person to two person medium. You get two faces on there, and in most of the time we can take in kind of those. We can take in, we can't take in stories. There's a limit to what we can take in. But I think that when we break it down to the creative community, you get to play in a collaboration with others. I don't think there's anything more fun to build a stable community, as Vonnegut's talking about, in which every cult has promised to create a stable
Yeah,
community.
that's the desire they're
Yeah,
feeding
yeah.
on. Yeah.
So, but I'm really interested in, are there ethical leaders? Are there ethical, can you build ethical groups? And can you build creative ethical groups in which you do? Because there are going to be no more gatekeepers.
Yeah.
That's going to be the important thing for your generation coming out, is that the gatekeepers are going to be gone. There's never been a line that you stand in Hollywood to be a director. You've got to be able to make your own stuff.
Yeah.
It's got to be able to find an audience. So the interesting thing is, can you find an audience that in which you're not just in which you're feeding and you're sharing and you're experiencing things which would fall into the healing arts that Vonnegut's talking about, but that still allow you to explore the darkness of our own imagination, and not be afraid of it.
Yeah, and you kind of you've got to. The only way out is through.
Yeah, and not be afraid of the nightmares.
Yeah.
And I think that's really fun for somebody making a micro horror film.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And you can make a micro horror film now for 1,000th of the money it would have cost 2 years ago to make.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Well, I'm sad that we're out of time, Daniel. It's been such a joy. Thanks for being with me on the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank y'all again for joining us. Again, this has been Daniel Voll. Go get the book, On the Run, with Mad Bombers, Outlaw Lovers, and Movie Stars. I've read a few of the stories myself, and I can promise you it rips. So please do. And thank you so much. We'll link the book below, as well as some of your other work, and we'll see you next time on Pep Talk.